The data analysts at NBC thought their systems had malfunctioned. They were monitoring viewership in real time during the All-Star broadcast when something unprecedented started happening. The numbers were not climbing gradually, they were spiking, hard, fast, in patterns that looked like a technical error rather than organic viewer behavior. So they did what any responsible data team would do. They ran diagnostics, they checked the feeds, they verified the metrics twice, then 3 times, because what they were seeing should not have been possible. Caitlin Clark had been on screen for less than 10 minutes, and she was outperforming the NBA players scheduled to compete in the actual game. Her analysis segment was generating more social media engagement than highlight reels from the All-Star competition itself. Clips of her breaking down plays were circulating faster than footage of dunks and alley-oops. The Caitlin Clark effect, that gravitational pull of attention that had redefined women's college basketball, had just crossed over into mainstream sports media. And according to multiple insiders who were watching this unfold from inside the WNBA, not everyone was celebrating. If you believe the story behind the story matters more than the headlines, hit that like button right now. It tells us you see what we see, and that we're digging in the right direction. Here's what NBC executives discovered that night. They had not just invited a WNBA player to provide commentary, they had introduced their audience to someone who commanded attention in ways the league itself never had. This was not about gender or representation or feel-good narratives. This was about raw, undeniable star power, the kind that cannot be manufactured or marketed into existence, the kind that either exists or it does not. And Caitlin Clark has it in abundance. But here is where the story gets complicated. Because while NBC was celebrating their decision to feature her, and while viewership data was confirming what everyone with eyes already knew, there were people inside the WNBA who were watching this moment with something far less than enthusiasm. Their discomfort was not about anything Caitlin said or did wrong. She was professional. She was insightful. She was respectful. The problem was what her success on that stage represented, and what it exposed about everything they had been told for years. The WNBA has operated under a specific philosophy since its inception. Growth was supposed to be collective. Stars were not meant to overshadow the league itself. The rising tide was supposed to lift all boats equally. Marketing focused on the sport, not individual players. Media coverage emphasized team success over personal brilliance. The message, delivered repeatedly and reinforced through every official channel, was clear: no one is bigger than the game. And then Caitlin Clark arrived and shattered that entire framework without even trying. She did not demand special treatment. She did not complain about coverage. She did not push for individual recognition. She simply played basketball at a level that made it impossible to look away. She stayed after practice, perfecting that logo three-pointer. She delivered passes that defied geometry. She brought an intensity and a competitive fire that translated through television screens and turned casual viewers into obsessed fans. Audiences responded by doing something they had never done before in the history of women's professional basketball. They showed up. They bought tickets months in advance. They subscribed to streaming services specifically to watch her games. They turned the Indiana Fever into must-see television for people who had never watched a WNBA game in their lives. They crashed websites trying to get access. They paid secondary market prices that would have seemed absurd for any women's sports ticket just 2 years earlier. The collective growth model collapsed under the weight of one undeniable truth. People do not fall in love with leagues. They fall in love with players. They invest emotionally in individuals whose stories they connect with, whose excellence they admire, whose journeys they want to follow. And Caitlin Clark had become the most beloved basketball player in America. Not the most beloved women's basketball player. Not the most beloved WNBA player. The most beloved basketball player, period. Regardless of gender, regardless of league, regardless of any category the sports world tried to place her in. The NBC broadcast made this reality impossible to ignore. Here was a WNBA player, a woman who competed in a league that many NBA fans had never seriously engaged with, commanding attention during primetime NBA coverage. She was not being treated as a curiosity or a special guest or a representative of women's basketball. She was being positioned as a basketball authority whose insights were valuable, regardless of which league she competed in. The implications were staggering. If Caitlin Clark could cross over into mainstream sports media as a voice rather than just a story, then the carefully maintained separation between men's and women's professional basketball was suddenly negotiable. The boundaries that had defined these spaces for decades were becoming permeable, and for people who had built their careers on that separation, who had positioned themselves as the proper authorities within their designated space. That possibility was deeply threatening. Many of you have been saying this for weeks. You have noticed the tension. You have picked up on the subtle resistance. You have seen the way certain narratives get pushed while others get suppressed. You were onto something. Because what happened at that NBC broadcast was not just about viewership numbers or social media engagement or even Caitlin Clark's undeniable talent. It was about power. About whose vision for the future of women's basketball gets to win. About whether the sport grows by celebrating its brightest stars or by maintaining an ideology that asks those stars to dim their light for the supposed good of the collective. Drop a comment right now and tell us what you think the WNBA's leadership is really afraid of. Is it losing control of the narrative? Is it admitting their marketing strategy has been wrong for years? Or is it something deeper? We read every single comment, and your insights shape where we dig next. The data that emerged in the hours and days after the broadcast confirmed what viewers had sensed in real time. Caitlin Clark's segment did not just perform well, it dominated. Social media engagement showed her clips circulating faster than content featuring the NBA players scheduled to compete in the game itself. Across platforms, comment sections overflowed with variations of the same sentiment. We came for the All-Star game. We stayed for Caitlin Clark. NBC executives, who had taken a calculated risk, now looked like visionaries. The network already understood her commercial power. During her senior year at Iowa, they had placed one of her record-breaking games behind the Peacock paywall, a move that sparked a surge in subscriptions that exceeded their most optimistic projections. They knew she moved numbers, but this was different. This was not about people paying to watch her play. This was about people choosing to engage with her thoughts, her analysis, her perspective on the game itself. She had transcended being just an athlete to watch. She had become a voice worth listening to. And in the hierarchy of sports media influence, that represents a level of cultural power that very few athletes ever achieve. But let us filter out the noise and focus on what was happening behind the scenes, because this is where the real story lives. According to sources with direct knowledge of internal discussions, several prominent WNBA players were not just uncomfortable with Caitlin's NBC moment. They were actively upset. Group chats were buzzing, private conversations were happening, and the central question being asked was not about her qualifications or her performance. It was about precedent. If Caitlin Clark becomes the face of women's basketball in mainstream media, what does that mean for everyone else? If she is the one getting invited to NBC broadcasts, getting featured in cross-promotional content, getting positioned as the authority that casual fans connect with, then what happens to the collective growth model that has been the foundation of the WNBA's identity? Reading between the lines reveals an uncomfortable truth. The resistance to Caitlin's success is not about her. It is about what her success proves. For years, players have been told that individual star power threatens the league's stability, that superstar marketing creates inequality, that the right way to grow women's basketball is to emphasize the quality of play across all teams, all players, all markets equally. And then Caitlin Clark shows up and demonstrates that this entire philosophy might have been holding the sport back. She proves that one transcendent star can generate more attention, more revenue, more mainstream legitimacy than a decade of collective marketing ever achieved. She shows that fans do not need to be educated about women's basketball as a concept. They just need someone to care about, someone whose excellence makes them want to tune in, someone whose story they want to follow. The WNBA's response to this reality has been revealing. Publicly, league officials celebrate her impact. They issue statements about record viewership and unprecedented merchandise sales and historic attendance figures. They take credit for the growth she has generated. But privately, according to multiple sources, there is deep discomfort with how much of the league's recent success is tied to one individual. Because if you acknowledge that Caitlin Clark is the engine driving this entire surge, then you have to confront some very difficult questions. Why did it take someone from outside your system to create this level of engagement? Why were you unable to develop or market your existing stars to achieve even a fraction of this impact? And if one player can single-handedly change the trajectory of the entire league, what does that say about everything you have been doing for the past 25 years? Connecting the dots reveals a pattern that many of you have already noticed. When Caitlin broke viewership records, the conversation quickly shifted to how the entire league was benefiting. When she sold out arenas, the narrative became about renewed interest in women's basketball broadly. When she drove subscription numbers that exceeded projections, the focus moved to the WNBA's overall growth metrics. The individual achievement kept getting reframed as collective success. And while there is truth to the idea that her impact lifts the entire league, there is also a deliberate effort to avoid acknowledging that the WNBA has a superstar whose drawing power operates on a completely different level than anyone else in the league's history. This matters because it shapes everything that comes next. If Caitlin Clark is just one player among many, then the league continues operating under the same collective growth model. But if she is recognized as the generational talent that she obviously is, then the entire structure has to change. Marketing strategies have to change. Media partnerships have to change. Revenue distribution models potentially have to change. And that creates winners and losers. People whose influence grows and people whose influence shrinks. Players who benefit from riding the wave she has created, and players who get left behind as attention consolidates around someone they cannot compete with for mainstream relevance. The NBC broadcast crystallized all of this into one undeniable moment. Caitlin Clark was not just successful on that stage. She was more successful than people who were supposed to be the stars of that particular show. She commanded attention in a space that was not designed for her, performing a role she was not expected to dominate. And she did it so naturally, so effortlessly, that it exposed how much bigger she has become than the frameworks people keep trying to fit her into. Before we go, make sure you are subscribed with notifications turned on, because this story is far from over. We are tracking how the league responds to this moment. We are watching how media partnerships evolve. We are investigating what this means for the future of women's basketball and who gets to control that future. The power dynamics are shifting in real time, and you are going to want to see what happens next. The question is not whether Caitlin Clark has changed basketball forever. She already has. The question is whether the institutions built around basketball are willing to acknowledge that reality and adapt accordingly, or whether they are going to keep pretending that the old rules still apply, even as everything around them transforms. Thanks for watching. We will see you in the next one.